Good afternoon. This is the new Pan-African show called Art-Afreeqa with your host Qasalawarq Sefu. Today we have a lovely guest and I'm going to make her introduce herself. Welcome to our studio.
Thank you so much, Qasala. My name is Munit Mesfin. Happy to be here. Musician, teaching artist, mother.
There you go. You can't just end as musician.
Yes.
So my first question was for you to tell us a little bit about yourself so you can elaborate on those.
Sure. Well, I've been doing music for a little bit of time, about almost now 20 years professionally since I got my first payment as a musician performing live here in Addis Ababa. I'm a teaching artist working with kids now in the States, working with just arts integration in education as well. And I'm a mother of three lovely people, three Ethio-Haitian Americans, nice. So a little bit of a Pan-African collective. And I'm sister to Jorga Mesfin, a wonderful musician as well.
Yes.
And yeah, I've lived here a little bit and around the world a little bit, been back and forth. So part of the just mobile movement of Ja people kind of situation. Nice. That's who I am, yeah.
Beautiful. How was your experience in Ethiopia before going to India at around 10 years old?
Yes, around that time. Yeah, I grew up around Nigeria Embassy. That was the area of my childhood. It was a very communal neighborhood where we really got together all the time. There was one TV in our house, so we used to always get together for our Babatasfai shows. And we used to do the same, like, the thing that he said, which is like, little people in the front, tall people in the back, and all of that. I just saw a lot of my neighbors as well recently, which was really lovely. I was a student at Indian National. I left at 5th grade. So I was doing a lot of Indian national anthems and geography and history before I ended up going to India with my mother, who worked with UNICEF at that time. But yeah, at that time, our family was, huge. We used to live with a lot of uncles and aunts that used to come through the group with my mother and my brother. My father lived in Debrecen, so I used to go back and forth during that time. So it was a kind of a very warm, lovely, communal existence. I was excessively shy as a child,
really?
Which is something that's still there. If you stay a while, you'll notice that I was an excessively shy child. So a lot of the artsy things happened afterwards, but before we left for India, we started doing piano lessons in Yared Music School with my teacher, Ezra Abata, who was our first teacher for both myself and Jorga. So that was the beginning of music for us, was instrument piano. And then new adventures happened.
I know, because India in itself is a whole other experience, especially at that age.
Yes.
Because I think it's a very sensitive age being moved. So do you have any special memories in India? What kind of country is it?
It is a tremendous country. I think the first thing that hit me when I got there was we were in Bombay, now Mumbai, and humidity. I had never experienced humidity. So the first thing was not being able to breathe because it was so humid. But once we got settled in, the first thing again that really struck me was just how vast the population is, how extreme everything is about it. The poverty is extreme, the wealth is extreme, the population is just amazingly, I grew up in a city, so it wasn't that much of a shock, but it was still a significant change. Culturally speaking, spiritually speaking, everything about it is super diverse. It has a very long and rich history of just science, math, astronomy, astrology. The diversity in everything was pretty spectacular. I was there from 10 to 14, so I was kind of, exactly what you said, transitioning from childhood to teenagehood. My friends were very international. We were going to an international school at that time, which was very nice. And the school itself that I went to was where I also started to be more present on stages and performances and musicals and things like that. But as a country, it is one of the most diverse, most culturally, spiritually, population-wise, very intriguing place. And it really is. And we got to see, the Ganga River, a little bit of the Himalayas, we went to see the Taj Mahal, which is one of the most overwhelming beautiful places. You know, it looks white on the outside, but you get closer to it, every inch has detail, like carving. Every inch is bejeweled, and you know, you don't see that when it's just a white.
No, you don't. You have
shiny
to get close.
thing. When you get close, I've never been so overwhelmed by beauty. But again, the poverty, the chaos.
I know, it's interesting.
All of it is at the same time. So it's a very fascinating place. I haven't gone back since I left, and it's something that my mother and I have always said we wanted to do, and I think it's changed very much since we were there in the early 90s. But I loved being there. It opened my mind in a way I couldn't imagine. Otherwise.
You know, I got a chance to go there in 2019.
Okay.
You know, the reason why I went was for medical reason for my mom, but still, the country hit me in a way where, like, you described all those amazing things, but one thing that really hit me and struck with me was the fact that if there's an animal, let's just take a cow. Animals in India are like,
they're very, they're
very sacred.
There's a lot of sacred, exactly.
Oh my God.
Exactly.
I could not believe it. The traffic will just stop. If the cow is sleeping on the road, nobody asks the cow to get up and move.
Not if you don't want any trouble.
Exactly.
And I mean, when we lived in the capital city, there were areas where there was colonies of monkeys right by the Constitution Hall. And I mean, it is exactly like you mentioned. And in the Hindu religion, there's a lot of symbolism and attachment with spirituality and the animals, and especially the cow. So if you don't want to have a mob come after you, definitely do not touch the...
So now from India, you guys went to Namibia. Now, that's a whole other different experience.
Extremely.
So we're going to have to tell us a little bit about that too.
I mean, I can tell you the first time we landed in Windhoek in the capital city, I thought we were crash landing because it was a desert. That's all I saw. There was no city, there was no sign of life. And I went, is that a deer jumping in the air? Like, it was such a contrast to the chaos and the population. I think like the Namibian population at that point was maybe 1.5 to 2 million people or so, which is what existed in our neighborhood in New Delhi, India. So when we got there, the emptiness, we got there I think on a Sunday, was quiet, it was empty, it was a whole different kind of experience. And it's a desert, so it was dry. I had never experienced the desert either. But in terms of my lived experience, what I loved about being there was my classmates were very African now. In India, I think I was the African, or maybe there was two of us, one from Zimbabwe and myself from Ethiopia that were in that school. But here, a lot of our friends were Kenyans, Tanzanians, Namibians, South Africans, Angolans, and things like that. So I really loved the Pan-African experience. We arrived soon after independence for Namibia, so everything was also brand new. And it was the end of apartheid, so you know, you have the German kind of European-looking center of the city, and then you have the next level, which had like after a bridge where they used to have passes that they needed to pass across that area from the white center to the colored center, and then one more step to the black neighborhood. So you got to see exactly what apartheid was like, and a lot of the institutions hadn't fully shed that, and there was still a lot of transitioning into being like a black-led nation. So experiencing that was kind of significant, and as an Ethiopian, not having had a colonial experience, I walked around like, you know, I belonged everywhere. And there was a lot of dirty looks and people following me in stores, and I was like, oh, there's such good customer service, until I realized, oh, it's because I'm black. I didn't know. And while I was there, you know, I look what they call colored, which is mixed race. So there was a lot of also just like that kind of relationship of, I see myself as black, but they see me as colored, and then the black folks are like, what are you? And I was Ethiopian. Ethiopia had a big role to play in, you know, the anti-apartheid movement in Southern Africa, so there was that respect around it. But it was just a very different, like, kind of a good grounding on what Africa and what a colonial experience and race relations in Africa, when you're, you know, when you were minority ruled by a white population looked like. And it was a very, again, eye-opening experience as well.
Before we get off of that subject, though, I want you to describe what black and mixed means.
I mean, in terms of the experience in Southern Africa, like at that point, used to be called Southwestern Africa, and Namibia was being led by almost the white population in South Africa there. So after generations of intermixing through mostly violence and rape, there was a population that is of black and white mix. So that population, and sometimes of Indian as well, that population that through time was not purely black and not purely white and not purely Indian, kind of became like this mix that's called colored. And in terms of, for example, even in the prisons and things like that, the way that people were stratified and treated was by you're white. In South Africa particularly, there's also Indian in the middle, there was colored, and there was black. And you were even fed more or less calories based on that kind of constitution.
Wow.
So it's a very kind of black is black, mixed is mixed, Indian is Indian, white is white kind of understanding. And I think like a lot of places with mixed race, if you could pass to be as white as possible was helpful to you as something, you know, as a survival mechanism people might have used. But for the most part, it was really, you know, you knew as a colored person, you never would get white privileges. And so you kind of have to decide who you ally yourself with. But it was, you know, the neighborhoods were stratified. Where you could and could not go and what you could and could not do was stratified based on that. So it was a very awkward thing.
I know, it must be.
Very, very awkward thing.
Because you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for myself, again, being of just an Ethiopian, you know, being an Ethiopian citizen made it easier because then it was, oh, a foreigner.
You were able to go both ways. Kind of either way, you were able to be.
Exactly. But culturally, there's differences.
Yeah. So after that, high school was in America. How was that experience? Any special experience? Because now we're going 3 different continents.
Yeah, 3 different continents. Yeah. I went to school up to 10th grade in Namibia where I took the British system, O-levels and A-levels and stuff like that. And at the A-level section in the education system within the British context, it kind of narrows you down to what you're very good at. So you do O-levels, you get very high grades in maybe math and science. Your A-levels will be math and science so that you can go into that track. I didn't want to be narrowed down, so that's when I went to a boarding school in northern Massachusetts in the States. So I ended up leaving my mother and saying, adventure.
No.
And so I was in a boarding school for 11th and 12th grade. And it was a very, of all the boarding schools that were around there, it's a prepper school, but ours was the most hippiest. Like it was founded by a Quaker named D.L. Moody. It was one of the first schools to have blacks, whites, Native Americans, etc. in at the same space, which is one of the reasons why I wanted it. One of the first schools to integrate men and women and things like that as well, because it used to be, you know, education was for men and boys, and then eventually becomes for women. But so the racial kind of integration was something that appealed to me, and it had a very fundamental developing the heart, the mind, and the hands kind of approach. So everybody had to do a work job. Some people worked in the farms. I used to work in the kitchens, and then eventually I became a student leader, and that was my job. But I loved that school very much because, again, the population was very diverse. I, was able to make friends from the Caribbean, from Asia, from the United States. Our international collective was very strong. And also it kind of, pushes you to be a little bit more independent, to be in a boarding school at 15, to manage yourself, to organize yourself, to apply for your colleges and things like that, on your own. So that was a little bit of a fast growing up session. I also did things like semester abroads and went to France because I was studying French at that time, which was really exciting. I was a scholarship kid, so that was really, really nice. There were very wealthy people in that school, which was, again, an eye-opening thing because I don't think it experienced wealth at that level as well. But it was a very grounded school that was, again, really developing a sense of service in its students, which I really appreciated. And I became, again, more involved in music and arts, was part of like gospel choirs and step teams, which is an African-American expression as well. And I got a little gumboot involved in it because I'd been in Southern Africa. So it was fun. It was fun. It was a good 2 years that I cherished very much.
Beautiful. So now we can go into the music. Awesome. So when did music performance start in your life?
In my life, the first thing, that piano lesson with Isra was the entry point. I was excessively shy, like I mentioned, so at home I would sing by myself to my cat. So it was never in front of any kind of a human being. The first stage that I did was in 6th grade, performing in a musical in 7th and 8th. But when I came to Namibia, I took it a little bit more to the next level. I joined the youth choir, the National Namibian Youth Choir, as one of the 2 or 3 non-Namibians singing Namibian songs.
That's beautiful.
Southern African choirs are a thing to behold. They're quite magnificent. And so we used to tour around the country with that. And I did, again, more flute. I started taking flute in India, so I did flute, piano, and choir there. But then the first time that I got like more of a center solo performing thing was in the high school that I went to, Northfield Mount Herman, where I joined the jazz band. And that was very comfortable for me because I grew up listening to jazz at our home. My parents had a lot of records that they brought home with them, and that was something that I was like, oh, this is nice. I grew up with these songs, I can do this. The first time I got paid was at Coffee House here. Guru Mazmur had a Thursday night jazz sessions at the Coffee House, and my brother, being their friend and me being the younger sister that kind of just followed around, they said, you want to jam? And I jammed well enough, and I got my 100 fee at that time, and I was so nervous to accept it, but that was the first paid gig. So from then on, every time I came home for the summer, I would always be at least at the Coffee House every Thursdays as much as possible to perform, share, mostly jazz and a little bit of Ethio jazz to the audiences then. And then it just kept going. College, I was part of choirs and reggae bands in the area called the Black Roots, which was a very cool collective of Cape Verdeans that were in Northampton, Massachusetts. And then when I moved to DC after college, Wayna Wandwessen, who's a Grammy-nominated Ethio-American, was the first, let me jam with you. I think we could do this well together, kind of, again, professional experience. And it kept going from that point forward. But around 18, 19 was when I started first being a professionally oriented person in music.
So now we go back to your college experience in America, because that's where you went to college.
Yeah.
How did you pick economics, government as a major?
Yeah.
Was it your passion?
I went to Smith College, which is an all-women's college. Again, nice and generous scholarships are a good way to decide where to go. I studied pre-med things at the beginning because I was really into science, and so biology and chemistry and things were, and math, calculus, all that was where I was at. But then organic chemistry came, and I realized I liked how mysterious everything was, and I did not want to know the structure of every cell in the world. And so then I started switching more towards the social sciences. The beginning parts were anthropology and sociology, but it was a little bit, I think the way that they taught it was a kind of, I don't know, it had a little bit of a colonial approach to like, oh, the natives are so interesting kind of approach that I was not very thrilled with. So then I thought, you know, a little bit of math and science was involved, and social science, economics was a little bit more interesting. There were very, very passionate and strong Zimbabwean / South African government professor as well that had just recently joined our campus. So she kind of pulled me more towards the government side of things. I love seeing how things work. I love understanding why societies are as good and bad as they are. And when it came to our upbringing, my mother was in public health. My father is a soil scientist working around natural resources and environmental protection. So development was my language that I grew up with, and kind of service. Serving the people, improving people's outcomes was something that I also was kind of involved in. So it wasn't so much a passion, but it was an in-between place between social science and science. So I think I kind of enjoyed that part.
Now you've decided that you've taken your journey into education. So how did you
get there?
I mean, granted, you have 3 kids, so that in itself is a reason to get into it. But
yeah, I mean, in terms of my professional career, it's been a little creative. So right after college, the first place I worked is an organization called Women for Women, which is again about women-centered development, post-conflict rehabilitation particularly. Eventually I had my first child, and I stayed home with him for about a year or so, and went the creative sector route of music performance as really the core of who I was. When I returned back to the States, though, there were people that saw me and saw that I had a vibration that would be very, very good to work with children. And there's an organization in the States called the Wolf Trap, which is a very beautiful performance space, but they also have an education arm. And somebody, a friend named Ben Hall, who plays with a band called Fidel Band in Ethiopia, in the States, recommended me because he was like, you have a vibration that works well with kids. And they're looking for artists that could actually work with teachers to do arts integration. So it wasn't exactly that I was working directly with the kids at the beginning. It was more training the teachers on how to use the arts to make it better for the children and for better outcomes. So how do you teach young kids, particularly the under 5s and the under 10s, the elementary school age, in a way that's really fun for them? There's rote memorization, there's this is what you need to learn, there's play-based and music-based and drama and movement-based. And in most research, they find that children just respond better to play, music, and movement. So they take dance professionals, drama professionals, and music professionals to integrate those skills and those tools for everything, including classroom management. Like you can scream at a group of classroom students to get up and now it's time to go to the playground, or you could sing them a song saying, let's go to the playground, let's go to the playground, and then they'll be like, all right, let's go, let's
I know,
let's
and
do
they'll start jamming with you.
And it's these tiny little things that increases both their joy and also increases your ability to manage them in a way that's super easy. And I grew up from, education that's like serious, focused, punishment, that kind of thing. So this is a really wonderful kind of opening of research-based understanding that play, music, movement is where the children are at. At that point, that makes everybody's experience better. You can teach them science through music. You can teach them math through music. You can expand their vocabulary. You can teach history through music. I also started working with an organization called the Ethiopian Community Center in Washington, D.C., and they have what they call out-of-school time programs. So that's like for the spring breaks, winter breaks, and summer breaks. So, and on those breaks, we would teach African history, Amharic language, and things along, including reading and math. And for a lot of the, especially Amharic language and African history, I would do things with music. And it was always easier and it was always funner. And years later, people still remember the songs, So we went through the entire 54 countries and one territory of Africa through music. And so now, at the beginning, they knew nothing. They knew maybe Ethiopia was in Africa, and maybe Egypt. But at the end, they had all of the countries that, they knew through songs. So it was really about saying, for children, the arts, the movement, the play is an integral part of how they learn and how they see the world and how they experience the world. We are naturally playing, dancing, moving people. And so how do you maintain that and how do you give that to teachers who are taught curriculum development, etc., but not necessarily play and music and movement as a way to provide better outcomes.
Sorry, was it easy for the teachers to actually take what you gave them and apply it to the students?
There were some that were very open to it, and then there were some that were like
very
reserved because they're not necessarily, they're like, I don't have a good voice. You don't need to have a good voice. It's just a little bit about rhythm and a way of like approaching that moment. Just, you can just go, let's go outside. Let's go outside. You don't have to sing well. You just have to, just reorient yourself to remembering what you were like as a child. Even for parents, we had to teach parents how you have to play along with the kids. I've done that, work in libraries as well. How to read a book, so it's not just reading a book, but that you make a little story and a song and a little dance with every other page so that you maximize the pleasure, you maximize the learning, you maximize the bonding as well. For a lot of people to revert to that childlike character, it's hard. It is hard, but I think when they especially see the positive outcome, then they go, oh, my life is easier now. Let's just keep going with this. And kids are the best audience. They're willing to try things and they're willing to go along with you. So it takes, some are like, let's do it all. And some are like,
reserved.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a more, when you see the feedback, it helps you keep pushing.
It makes teachers actually get over their ego also.
Exactly. Play is a really
thing.
good way to humanize everybody, and it's something we forget. And it's sad that we do, but it's really good to remember.
So now let's go back to your music, since we're on there. Now, you did say you started taking piano lessons. That's how it started, right? So when you went back, I shouldn't say you went back. When you went to college, music was also in your life.
Absolutely.
So it never really stopped at any point. You always had it in
Exactly.
your life since you
just,
begun.
It just transforms. Sometimes
Right.
it's on a stage in a musical, sometimes it's in a choir, sometimes it's in a jazz band, sometimes it's a background reggae person, sometimes it's a front jazz person. But once I dared to get on stage and perform, it just kind of kept going. Yeah.
It took you.
It took me. It's true.
So during the millennium, you decided to come back home.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to come back home at that particular time?